Welcome. In this lecture, I want to introduce something called vertical asymptotes. So let's just kind of get started with what these are, and then in the next few lectures, we'll kind of go through some kinds of examples. Okay, so the line. So this is going to be the line x equals a is going to be called a vertical asymptote. So is a vertical asymptote. Vertical asymptote. It's a funny word with a P in it that you can't hear. So a vertical asymptote. Sometimes you can a little bit, but often not. Okay. So we have the graph of a function, y equals f of x. So we have y equals f of, and then this same x here is this x here. Okay. So we have two different circumstances. So when we have, so we could have that the limit as x goes to a, so the limit as x goes to a, limit as x goes to a of f of x equals plus or minus infinity. So equals plus or minus infinity. So you can be in that circumstance. Or the second circumstance, and we'll go through these separately in separate videos, but first in this one we just kind of talk about some more overall things. So as x goes to a from the plus or minus side of f of x, we get plus or minus infinity. Okay, so there's a few things in here to unpack before we kind of jump in here. Okay, so when I say that we get, so this plus or minus infinity, so a little bit of unpacking. Let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to unpack. So the first thing to kind of look at is, what do I mean by, right, it equals plus or minus infinity? So this is kind of the first thing to unpack. Okay, so what am I talking about here? So, right, I either end up with plus infinity or I end up with minus infinity. So either this equals plus infinity, so, or just infinity is really what we mean by plus infinity. This is the same thing. Or it equals minus infinity. Okay, so in one of these circumstances, right, and this gets really, really big positive, so it gets really, really big positive. Okay, and it's actually the outputs that are getting really, really big positive. So maybe I'll even I'll box this one in green. So when we're saying this, it's the outputs are getting really, really big positive. Or, so you'd say the outputs get really, really big negative. So really, really big negative, right? And you can check these, right? So we can check. So this is kind of what they are, but the other key thing about them is, so we can check these by looking at, so can check by looking at the graph near, right, when we have x equals a. And we'll show you some pictures, which will hopefully help. But I kind of wanted to unpack this first anyway, because there's a lot of lingo in here. Or the other thing you can do is, right, put in values really close to a. Or add values really close to a. So at x, values really close to a. Let's just put this on a new line. Okay, so you can check by looking at the graph, or x value is really close to a. Really close to a. Okay, the other thing that I have that's funny going on here is I'm writing x goes to a plus or minus, so that's the only other funny thing in there, just to kind of get used to the kind of lingo that we use. So what am I doing with that? It's that I'm looking at, right, so this is to remember, so I'm looking at two different limits, right, and this is just to kind of remember, so here's a, right, and then coming in this direction, right, is to say I'm coming in, right, so I would take that limit, and it needs to either give me an output or plus infinity or minus infinity. And then I would need to take this limit and see that it gives me an output of plus infinity or minus infinity. Okay, so that's just kind of unpacking a little bit of the language of what's going on here. But we'll actually kind of go through some cases and pictures in the following few lectures, which I think will help a lot. Okay, so I hope that made some sense, and I'll see you in those next lectures.